Hello, my name is Dan. I'm with Drone Flyers. Now that the dust has had a little bit of time to settle on the changes that came out not that long ago from the FAA in regard to recreational drone pilots, I'm going to go ahead and just talk about those changes for a few seconds, really just a few minutes. I'm going to try to keep it pretty short and brief and kind of make it pretty clear and to the point. And so, first and foremost, we should know that Part 101 is no more. It's now been replaced by what the FAA is calling Section 49 to USC 44809. It's quite a mouthful back comparatively when it was just called Part 101. The FAA has gone ahead and made it very clear in the first set of their changes for being recreational flyers, and that is that you can only have the purpose of flying recreational through the entire operation. So that means you can't take off, see some cool shots, and say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead, now I'm going to turn this into a Part 107 operation. Of course, if you're licensed for Part 107, take those pictures and then be like, all right, I'm converting back to a recreational pilot now. So whatever you take off with, you must land with, and the entire flight must be conducted under. If you want to operate under these new rules at all, then you need to be a recreational pilot from beginning through end of the flight. Any time that you're going to operate for some sort of revenue, whether it be barter or actual exchange of currency, you're now a Part 107 operator, and none of the things we're talking about today really apply to you. So the FAA is now making it pretty much mandated, where before it was highly recommended, that people operate in accordance with a community-based organization, sometimes called a CBO. So the FAA is also trying to figure out exactly what they want to set the criteria for CBOs. They've come up with a list of criteria, and I didn't include them in this slide because it's kind of dry and really not super important to you unless you're thinking of starting your own community-based organization. But what's going to happen is the FAA is going to have to individually now certify these CBOs. These CBOs are going to have their own set of safety guidelines and best practices, and as we continue on, you're going to see that some of them, and probably more are yet to come, are going to actually have certain fixed flying sites, and in a little bit we'll get into more detail what I mean by that term, fixed flying sites. So for now, just know that the FAA expects you, if you're a recreational flyer, to be attached to some sort of CBO. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to join the organization, but you do have to follow their rules, and you should be able to speak to what those rules are. That's actually written in the instruction, that if you were to be asked by, say, a law enforcement personnel, you need to be able to talk about what those rules are that you are following and how you are applying them to your operation. And we also find that the FAA has now made it very clear that the aircraft does need to be within visual line of sight of the person operating it, or a visual observer, and what they use the word is co-located and in direct communication with the operator. So by co-located, I believe what they're trying to avoid is someone setting up what is often referred to as a Dixie chain of observers, and although you can't see the aircraft, you know, a guy 100 feet away can, and then from that observer you may have another observer, you know, 300 feet away, and before long what you're doing is you're flying really way beyond line of sight. The aircraft is maybe a half a mile away from the pilot, and even one single stationary observer wouldn't be able to monitor that aircraft. They have to communicate with other observers. Probably the real intent of this regulation is to allow things like FPV flying, and to make it clear that you do need to have someone with you when you're FPV flying, which was always a recommended practice, and CBOs of course mandated it, such as AMA. However, now the FAA is making sure that you understand that you need to be able to either see the aircraft, or someone that is with you or not far from you also can see the aircraft and must be able to communicate with you. The aircraft's operated in a manner that doesn't interfere with and gives way to other manned aircraft. So this is kind of what I would like to think a common sense regulation. I believe all of us were doing this pretty much from long ago. However, you know, because of a few bad eggs out there decided to do some interesting things, such as fly really close to airports and airports would be shut down, then we had to go ahead and, I guess, have this rule imposed upon us. In essence, stay out of the way of manned aircraft. If there's a manned aircraft operation going on, you shouldn't be that close to it anyway. And before I can go on to this next slide, I would say this, that sometimes you may be flying in Class G airspace, so airspace that you can fly without any special permission, and you may find things like helicopters that are flying really low to the ground or within your airspace. You certainly have to yield right of way for them. You don't need to have an authorization to be in that airspace, but you do need to be watchful, and if you see them coming, you hear them coming many times. In some of the areas I fly, I can usually hear a helicopter coming before I see it. You certainly need to be swinging your head around on a pivot, looking for them, and bringing your drone into a position where it's not going to conflict with that aircraft. All right, this moves us to number 5. So in Class B, C, or D airspace, or within the lateral boundaries of a surface area of Class C airspace designed for an airport, we have to have now permission from an administrator or someone who's been given authorization to be able to give permission. Now, this has been going on for a long time in the Part 107 rule, where we have had to get permission, whether it be from the FAA's waiver website or from something called Atlantic, and we'll get into that in a moment. However, for recreational flyers, it's been pretty much, if it was an uncontrolled airport, you let the airport manager know. If it was a controlled airport, then you're going to go ahead and let, the control tower know. And in all reality, you weren't getting permission, you were informing. Well, things have now changed. You have to operate very much like a Part 107 pilot, and that if it is anything but Class G airspace, you have to get permission now before you can fly in it. Class E airspace is kind of like an extension area outside of a controlled airport that allows for, in manned aircraft, it would be higher visibilities and cloud ceilings. However, in the cases of a drone pilot, it just means that we're going to need permission to fly there. So sometimes Class E airspace will extend a little further than just the area immediately surrounding the airport. The whole idea for Class E airspace extensions, the surface area extensions it's talking about in the slide, is that it allows aircraft to come in during less than favorable weather and to be protected from other aircraft, so that all those aircraft who can't see each other, maybe they're flying in the clouds or in really bad visibility, are able to complete an instrument approach to land safely. So the caveat to requiring this authorization is that there are no authorizations possible right now for recreation. It's temporarily limited to certain what we call fixed fields. So there's an online system known as LANIC, it stands for Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability, that in many areas of the country now, Part 107 pilots can go ahead, log on to a site. Many of us even have it on apps on our phones. And what happens is you'll basically draw your little aircraft diagram, or you may put in the latitude, longitude, depending on the website or the app that you're using on your phone, and it gets permission instantaneously for you to fly in that airspace if it's available. There are still some airports in the country in which you do have to go ahead as a Part 107 pilot, go to the FAA website and request through the web link, you fill out a form to get permission, and sometimes those requests can spin around pretty quick and you might get them back in a couple weeks. Sometimes they can take a month or two to get permission. The FAA is talking about now changing this LANIC system so that it can incorporate recreational pilot requests. In the meantime, they don't want to flood all the systems, really, all the control towers with a bunch of recreational pilots now requesting permission to fly in their airspace. So what they've done is they have basically chosen certain fields that are associated with community-based organizations such as AMA, and they've said that if these fields are operating within controlled airspace, you can fly on these fields, but otherwise you're limited to Class G airspace right now. As a recreational pilot now, more than ever, in order to comply with these regulations, it becomes very, very important to understand There's different types of airspace, and I highly encourage you to look at where you're going to be flying at, whether it's your backyard or maybe you're traveling on vacation to a new site, to get yourself either a sectional map. The old paper copies are still floating around out there, but many times you can go to a website and it'll actually figure out where you are. You'll type in the name of your airport and it literally will pinpoint on a live time map the airspace that you're in or near, so you can make a determination whether you're going to need to get permission, or in this case, in this day and age, temporarily, you're just not going to be able to fly there unless there's an airport, a fixed field near there. It has a link on their website to a rather large Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to go ahead and post a link to that spreadsheet as well underneath this video. However, I did copy and paste just a small sample of what this looks like on the Excel spreadsheet from the FAA that lists the sites. So we can see a couple here, such as Frontier Fun Flyers 3, Midnight Sun RC Inc. 1, and it literally talks about these are AMA sites. It gives you the ID, the latitude, the longitude, the city it's in, the state it's in, the zip code, the highest that you're allowed to fly in that area. So if we look down several of these to say Harrison Warthogs 1, we find that 200 feet is as high as you can fly there. And then there is actually a hyperlink not far away to the right hand side where you can actually go ahead and find more information and points of contact for that field. In Class G airspace, which is the airspace in which there is neither A, B, C, or D, or E, then you are pretty much able to fly in without any permission. You can go up to 400 feet. They've now made that 400 feet rule that was highly recommended before in Section 101, now an actual rule. So we cannot fly more than 400 feet above ground level. And in order to get up that high, we need to be in Class G airspace. Otherwise, you're going to have to go to that fixed site spreadsheet I just showed you, and you're going to have to look at what the ceiling maximum is for that area, which is the highest you can go. Like we saw briefly, there was one you could go up to 400 feet above ground, the other one 200 feet above ground. Those are all depicted in above ground. If there are other airspace around, such as you may find special use airspace, things like military operating areas, prohibited areas, restricted areas, we also need to be in compliance with those. And here is probably one of the most contested ones, and that is you now are going to be required to pass an aeronautical knowledge test to fly recreationally. They're not really calling it getting a license, but you're going to have to go ahead and demonstrate that you have some general safety knowledge, and I'll get into that shortly and what particular they want to test you on. And you're going to have to provide proof when you're flying, so you bring a copy with you of it or the actual test result, just to show that you did take it and pass it when you're flying. Now it sounds like it's going to be an online test, and it sounds like it's probably going to be able to be proctored out to CBOs or some other administrator. It does sound like their intention is to make it a little different than the Part 107 operations. We're going to just have to see how it unfolds, because we don't have a whole lot of information floating around at this time anyway in regards to who's going to be given the test and any fees, or if it's going to be entirely proctored, or how it's going to work out. The aircraft does need to be registered and marked. Nothing new there. That's been going on for a while. So just continue to mark your drone. We do know that not long ago the rule was changed so that the marking has to be in a place that is visible on the outside of the aircraft. Prior to that, as long as it was accessible without a tool, it was okay. So people were putting inside their battery compartments, things like that, just purely for aesthetic purposes. But now it does need to be on the outside of the aircraft. It does need to be easy to find, and certainly it has to be registered. The registration process costs you all of $5 and is good for 3 years. So now we get to the aeronautical knowledge test. So within 180 days of making this law, the FAA has got to figure out what exactly they want on the test, who can administer it. It is going to be, as it's mentioned here, electronically delivered, so there's not going to be a paper and pen or paper and pencil test. If any of you remember those days, back when I took my first manned aircraft written exam, we used to actually take them at the airport. It was like the old school, high school days where you had little bubble sheets you filled in with a pencil. I kid you not. So things have changed a lot over the years. All that they're giving us for feedback right now is that on the test there will be a requirement to demonstrate aeronautical safety knowledge and a knowledge of the regulations and requirements for aircraft in the National Airspace System. So they're probably going to ask you some airspace questions. They really want you to just regurgitate, more than likely, some of the stuff we've talked about today and the fact that you need permission to operate in these areas. They may ask you, like they do in the Part 107 test, a few questions on what those limitations of those airspace are. It makes sense that you should be able to understand the boundaries of that airspace. Otherwise it's hard for you to comply with the airspace. But we're really just truthfully going to have to see. I'm sure that more guidance will come out when the FAA gets closer to these tests being fully finished. Right now they're still in the development stage. But it is a requirement, and you can expect that you're going to have to sometime in the next, I would say, 6 months or so. They've got 6 months to put it into enforcement. Take a written test online. And that's it. Like I said, I wanted to try to keep this as short as possible. I'm going to go ahead and list a link below this on YouTube so that you can find that entire spreadsheet of the fixed sites. In addition to that, you should know the FAA has a map. If you want to go ahead and, if you're more of a visual person, and take a look at where those sites are at, you can go ahead and click on the link, and I'm also going to post below, that'll take you to that map. I have found that FAA map so far is not really fantastic, but I'm sure it's a work in progress. Again, my name is Dan. I'm with Drone Flyers. If you have any questions whatsoever, I will do my best to answer them in a prompt manner. You can go ahead and email me at droneflyers1@gmail.com. Thanks for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Happy flying.